Access to funds and relationships are the main reasons why people fail. TD Jake recently gave his daughter ownership of the largest church in America. At the age of 14, the same daughter became a teen mother. But people aren't discussing for that reason. Jake's name was revealed in court records by a producer who was suing Diddy. Then an individual from the 1980s made claims. Jake responded by filing a lawsuit of his own. There's more going on at Potter's house than the billion-dollar deals and the near-death experience on live television. Furthermore, the true narrative is only now beginning to emerge. On June 9, 1957, Thomas Dexter Jakes was born in South Charleston, West Virginia. Ernest Jakes, Sr., his father, owned a little janitorial company. Odith, his mother, was a teacher. Despite their hard labor, life was never simple. Out of the 3 children, Thomas was the youngest. Their house was in a low-income black community where racism and hardship were commonplace. The finances were tight. There were little opportunities. However, something strong was developing under that strain. His parents instilled in him the values of perseverance, hard effort, and self-belief. That way of thinking will influence all he became in the future. Thomas's lisp was so severe as a youngster that most people believed he would never be a preacher. However, that's precisely what he desired. He would preach to trees in his lawn and stuffed animals in his bedroom. Even though he was just a child, the fire was already present. A few of his classmates made fun of him. Even while several adults rolled their eyes, he persisted. They began referring to him as Bible Boy. He was indifferent. He practiced daily. He constantly practiced his speech and mimicked the sermons he heard at church. He wasn't content to merely converse. He desired to influence others. His armor was that early passion. Then, everything was different. His father suffered from kidney failure, the kind that gradually robs you. When Thomas was 10 years old, treatment was scarce in those days, particularly for West Virginia's black families. His dad became weaker. His mother and Thomas took over the role of his caregivers. It was too much for a youngster to handle. He had no other option though. He needed to mature quickly. Despite missing school, taking care of his siblings, and doing the housework, he never voiced any complaints. He was forever changed by witnessing his father's suffering. It showed him the value of family love and how fleeting life can be. The pain worsened 3 years later. When his father passed away in 1973, Thomas was only 16 years old. The family was inconsolable. Everything fell apart, both financially and emotionally. Thomas had been volunteering part-time at the Union Carbide plant, but he suddenly had more work to do. He worked at any job he could find with his brother. On certain days they were unsure of how they would eat. However, Thomas continued to preach despite the darkness, only his voice, his faith, and his fire little churches, small people, and no money. He became a man before he was ready, after losing his father. However, it also brought him nearer to his purpose. Thomas delivered his first actual sermon in 1976 when he was just 19 years old. He was formally ordained in 1979. For a young man who had experienced so much, it was a significant step. Even if the lisp persisted, it was no longer an issue. People paid attention because they sensed that he had lived out every word. He wasn't merely quoting the Bible, he was gushing blood. During the day, he held regular occupations, and at night, he preached anywhere he could. Although his life didn't yet appear to be a success story, the groundwork had been established. There was more to come. That in 1981, something began to take shape. In Beckley, West Virginia, Thomas received an invitation to speak at a church revival. He met Sarita Ann Jameson there. Her birthday is August 19, 1955. She was well respected, intelligent, and already involved in ministry activities. However, she had a painful background. In front of his kids, her brother had been killed. She has experienced abuse in past partnerships. She nevertheless came to hear Thomas preach. Something clicked that night. He drew her in. People stated they were smitten. They struck up a conversation. After 6 months, they tied the knot. Quick, unvarnished, and authentic. It was more than just love. It was fate. It wasn't an easy marriage for them. Not at all. At the start, they had no money. While Thomas preached during the day, Sarita worked as a Christian radio DJ at night. Despite their lack of wealth, they were full of dreams. Then, after only 6 months, catastrophe struck. Sarita's feet and legs were crushed in an automobile accident. The doctors doubted that she would ever be able to walk again. Thomas, however, would not allow her to quit up. He assisted her in relearning how to walk. Together, slowly, painfully, that was the turning point that made their marriage unbreakable. Sarita developed into more than just a wife over time. She joined the ministry as a partner, publishing her own books and directing women's groups. Jakes founded Temple of Faith Congregation, his first congregation, in Montgomery, West Virginia. In 1980, when he was just 23 years old, there were 10 members. That's all, just belief. No money, no fame. A storefront was rented by them. The summers were hot and the winters were freezing. Bills were piling up. They occasionally gathered empty bottles solely to purchase food. from Montgomery to Smithers to South Charleston to Cross Lanes and ultimately to Dallas, Texas. The word continued to spread. The Potter's House expanded from 10 individuals, one of the largest churches in America, with over 30,000 members, mostly because he persisted. Thomas continued to work while constructing that first church. At the Union Carbide chemical plant, he recorded his time. Hazardous labor. Long hours, mining fumes, welding chemicals, and then straight to the pulpit. No stops or rest, just hustle. The factory closed in 1982. Jake was laid off. The situation worsened. For $100 each day, he dug ditches for his brother. Not always able to cover the expenses. They occasionally had to decide between electricity and water. He and Sir alternated between paying one bill at a time. They used the family's bottles when there was no water. They utilized candles in the absence of light. However, the sermons continued. At the age of 25, in 1982, T.D. Jake occupied a little Smithers, West Virginia, church, with barely 10 members. Enough to occupy a single curate, was known as the Greater Emmanuel, Temple of Faith. That would have been viewed as a dead end by most people. Jake, however, noticed something else. He had virtually nothing with his wife, Saritha. Consequently, through writing, books, and prayer, to keep their lights on, she even worked late hours as a Christian radio DJ. However, Jake continued to preach while using all of his resources. When he was younger, he preached to made-up audiences and became known as Bible Boy. He was now preaching to actual souls in need of hope. The church was located in a cold, suffering community. Jake, however, ignored the poverty. He saw possibilities. He hosted his first church conference in 1983. The title was Back to the Bible. There were 80 attendees. That was 8 times the church's initial size. It was the first concrete indication that his message would be widely understood. Outside of Smithers, Jake took a chance in the same year. In addition to starting a new show called Back to the Bible, he paid $45 for a 30-minute radio slot. It was a significant risk. Although his church was unable to pay for it, he was a firm believer in the power of the media. His voice began to spread to desolate houses, chilly towns, and locations where no preacher had gone. He immediately struck a chord with the audience. His remarks were powerful and empathetic. The individual who had previously spoken to 10 people was suddenly being heard by hundreds. The entire situation was altered by one small radio broadcast. He became a local celebrity as a result, and people eagerly anticipated hearing his voice each week. It also prepared the ground for the subsequent events. Jake realized in 1988 that he had to go beyond his storefront church. At that point, he became a member of Higher Ground, Always Abounding Assemblies, a Pentecostal denomination. Bishop Sherman Watkins, who soon became Jake's father figure and mentor, served as its leader. Watkins had only 11 employees at first. Something about Jake reminded him of his own experience. Jake gained more than just a title when he joined this organization. It provided him with more resources, a larger audience, and more resounding support. Their message, which took regular people and shown to them that they might serve an incredible God, was exactly the same as his. Jake was no longer working alone, thanks to this new relationship. He had a road to something greater, a network, and a leader. Then the motions started. Jake moved his church to South Charleston, West Virginia, in 1990 from Smithers. Although it was a smaller city, it was far bigger than the one he began in. The number of persons in the church grew from about 100 to over 300. Jake didn't advocate for superficial ease. He addressed the forgotten, the addicted, and the hurting. By 1993, he took yet another risk. It's time to change lanes. A middle-class suburb with a large white population. A black Pentecostal pastor settling in such a place was unprecedented. However, it was successful. Over 2,100 people joined his church, with 40% of them being white. That was unusual, even startling. However, it demonstrated that Jake could transcend racial and social divides without diluting his message. Prior to these actions, Jake had already made a significant shift in 1987. He was ordained into the bishop's office at the age of 30. Officially, he was touched by Dr. Quander L. Wilson at the Charleston Civic Center. He received more than simply a new title at the occasion. He gained respect, authority, and the capacity to manage more congregations as a result. He had shown himself through perseverance and enthusiasm. The church now recognized it with authority and status. Everything altered once more in 1993. On the Trinity Broadcasting Network, Jake started a weekly TV show. The Potter's Touch was the name of the event. His sermons were no longer confined to a room. Millions of homes had it. His message started to spread throughout the nation and even internationally. His communication approach was straightforward, passionate, vivacious, and honest. In order to keep up with the expansion, he relocated to Dallas, Texas, only 3 years later. His program was broadcast in more than 100 countries by that point. This was no longer only a ministry. There was a movement. He took yet another Calculated risk. In 1994, he collaborated with BET, or Black Entertainment Television. Black audiences, who hardly ever saw religious leaders like him on mainstream TV, were directly reached by this. He did more than merely preach. He customized them. He discussed topics such as everyday survival, healing, fatherhood, money, and dignity. Millions of people in the U.S., the Caribbean, Africa, and Europe received these messages. His voice instantly captured the attention of those who had never set foot in a church. He established the Manpower Conference, a forum exclusively for men. In the same year, Detroit was the site of the first one. There were thousands. It was vulnerable, honest, and unvarnished. Jake reassured guys that it was acceptable to experience anguish, to break down, and to recover. The meeting continued to expand. In 2011, a Dallas event drew almost 9,000 guys. Since the start, more than 150,000 guys have arrived. A few arrived by plane from Italy. His voice carried that far. Jake took another chance in 1995. TJ Enterprises was founded by him. It was more than just a company. A vision came to mind. He used it to release music records, produce movies, and publish books. Woman, Thou Art Loose, his debut feature film, was a box office success in 2004. Next came Heaven is for Real in 2014, followed by Jumping the Broom in 2011. Over 20 million copies of his books have been sold globally. Black Enterprise claims that TDJ Enterprises generated close to $400 million. He was no longer merely a preacher. He was powerful, a producer, and a publisher. In Dallas, he even established a school and built a housing complex worth $150 million. Jake hosted the Get Ready show from 1995 to 1996. It was broadcast on television and radio. It included live calls, music, interviews, and preaching. It was broadcast on TBN, BET, and several syndication channels. As a result, it was among the most widely viewed religious broadcasts. Millions of people watched. The subjects were authentic, addiction, spousal abuse, financial difficulties, dysfunctional households, and Jake never held back. He did more than merely deliver sermons. He spoke to those who were hurting.